Okay, we'll start with the skeletal muscle contraction. And these will be the learning outcomes where we'll describe the ultrastructure of the skeletal muscle fiber and the organization of the myofibril. We'll describe the role of certain new terms of the skeletal muscle, that is transverse tubule, sarcoplasmic reticulum, thin and thick filaments, contractile and regulatory proteins in excitation contraction coupling. We'll describe the chemical and the mechanical steps in the cross-bridge cycle, and we'll also describe the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction. And lastly, we'll explain the role of calcium and ATP in muscle contraction and relaxation and its clinical application. So these will be the learning outcomes which will be achieved by the end of this lecture. Okay. So coming to the skeletal muscle, you must know it is attached to the skeleton. So that's why we call it as the skeletal muscle. Now this skeletal muscle is voluntary because it contracts on its own, and it does not contract on its own. It's voluntary, and it's not involuntary, but still it participates in the reflex activity, which is involuntary. So if you take a knee hammer and hit over the tendon, your muscle reflexly contracts. So in that situation, it is not voluntary. Otherwise, it is voluntary, which is telling that it is under our control. And we have the nerve supply to the skeletal muscle, which is the somatic motor neuron, which emerges out of the spinal cord to innervate the skeletal muscle. So we call it as the somatic nerve supply. We have already seen the difference between the two divisions of the peripheral nervous system, that is autonomic and the somatic nervous system. So this is the somatic neuron, which comes out of the spinal cord to innervate the skeletal muscle. And this forms the part of the somatic nervous system. It is myelinated and releases the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. We have seen in the previous lecture about the release of acetylcholine and how a muscle action potential is generated in the skeletal muscle during neuromuscular transmission. We'll progress with that further, how the muscle action potential causes skeletal muscle contraction in today's session. Now coming to the skeletal muscle, you must know this is the skeletal muscle which you can see here. It is made up of the muscle belly, and skeletal muscle consists of large number of muscle fibers. You can see these are the large number of muscle fibers, and it also forms a connective tissue framework. Now the muscle fibers, you can see here, the muscle fibers are grouped into bundles which are called as the fasciculus. We call it as the fasciculus. And the fasciculus is covered by connective tissue, which is called as the perimysium. We call it as the perimysium. So we have the muscle, which is made up of many bundles, which is called as fasciculus. And inside the bundles, you have many muscle fibers. Now the fasciculus is covered by perimysium, and each of the muscle fibers are covered by the connective tissue, which is called as the connective tissue. You must know there are connective tissue sheets, and three types of connective tissue sheets are there, which are shown here. This is perimysium, you can see here, epimysium, and you can see endomysium. Okay, so the perimysium covers the entire muscle belly, the muscle bundle or the fasciculus, and outside to that, the entire muscle belly is covered by epimysium, also called as the deep fascia, and the individual muscle fibers are covered by what is called as endomysium. So these are the connective tissue sheets. Now, each of the muscle fibers consists of myofibrils. It is made up of myofibrils, and each myofibril is made up of the contractile proteins. So this is the arrangement of the skeletal muscle fiber. It is made up of fiber bundles, which is called as fasciculus, and the fibers are made up of fibrils, and each myofibrils are made up of the thick and the thin filaments, which are having the contractile proteins. Now the connective tissue covering is three, that is epimysium, perimysium, and the endomysium. Okay. Fasciculus is surrounded by a sheet of connective tissue called as perimysium, and the muscle belly is surrounded by the connective tissue called as epimysium, and the muscle fiber is surrounded by a connective tissue called as endomysium. So this is the arrangement of the skeletal muscle. So the same diagram you can see here, muscle is made up of fiber bundles called as fasciculus. Fiber bundles are made up of fibers, and each fiber is made up of fibrils. Now the fibrils consist of the arrangement of the filaments, which are called as the thick and the thin filaments. And thick and the thin filaments are made up of the contractile proteins. So we must know about the organization of the myofibril. So you can see here certain thicker proteins, and you can see a thinner protein. So the ones which are shown in blue is the thicker protein, and the one which is shown in red is a thinner protein. Now the thick protein is called as the myosin filament, or we call it as the thick filament. And the thinner red one is made up of mainly actin molecule or actin protein. So we call it as the actin filament. So that is the arrangement of the myofibril. Now, these are seen as the dark and light bands because of the difference in the refractive index of its different parts. So that's why you see the thick filaments will be seen as dark and the thin filaments will be seen as light. It's because of the change or difference in the refractive index. Now the dark band is called as the A band. So we call this as the A band. Now A stands for anisometropic to the polarized light. So in this area, you can see here the thick filaments line up the thin filaments. So you can see thick filaments are lining up the thin filaments. And the A band, you can say, is mostly made up of the myosin molecule. It is made up of the myosin molecule. Now coming to the other bands of the myofibril, we have, in addition to the A band, we have what is called as the I band. Now the I band is a light band, and it is called as I band because it is isotropic to the polarized light. And this area, if you see, contains only the thin filaments. It contains only the thin filament. And that is about the A band and the I band. Now you must know about the two lines which you can see here, which are called as the Z line. So each of the I band is intersected, or in between the I bands, it is bisected by a narrow dark Z line. And Z line in German means between the discs. So that's why we call it as the Z line. So you can see here the part of the myofibril between the two Z lines, two adjacent Z lines, is called as sarcomere. So we have known what is A band, what is I band. The middle of the I band, you have the Z line, and in between the two adjacent Z lines, the area is called as the sarcomere. So basically, sarcomere has the half of the I band, the entire A band, and the other half of the I band. So that constitutes or forms the sarcomere. The sarcomere is about 2.5 microns in length at rest, and it is composed of the parallel arrangements of the thick and the thin filaments. So this is about the Z line and the sarcomere. In addition to the A band and the I band and the Z line, we also have what is called as the H zone. And this is seen in the center portion of the A band. It is seen in the center portion of the A band. And this is a lighter zone, which is called as the H zone, where the thin filaments do not overlap with the thick filaments. So you can see here, there are no overlap with the thin filaments and the thick filaments. So that zone is called as the H zone. And in the center of the H zone, you can see what is called as the M line. and this is more pronounced during muscle contraction. So we call it as the M line. Now the H zone, or the word H, represents the discoverer Henson, who discovered this zone. So we call it as the H zone. And even in the German, the hell means light. So that's why we call it as the H zone. The light is called as hell in German. So we named it as the H zone. So we don't know how it got the name H. Okay, so this is the H zone. And this constitutes the entire organization of the myofibril. So you know what is made up of the A band, I band, H zone, Z line, M, and the sarcomere. Any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so that is the organization of the myofibril. The same is shown here, and in this you can see a little more about the thick and the thin filaments. Thick filament mostly refers to the myosin protein, so we call it also as the myosin filament. And the thin filament, the major protein there is the actin protein, so we call it as the actin filament. And this is again the arrangement of the thick and the thin filaments. We have the A band, we have the H zone, we have the M line, we have the I band, and we have the Z line. And in between the two adjacent Z lines, we have what is called as the sarcomere. Now, in addition to this, there are various other proteins which are attaching the thick filaments to the Z line, and we have the Z line which is being attached to the center. So we have various other proteins. I want you to explore more about those anchoring proteins. I am not going to tell you about those anchoring proteins, but remember the A band, the thick filaments are attached to the Z line, and the Z line is also attached to the center, that is the M. And we have those proteins are called as the anchoring proteins. So you need to find out about the anchoring proteins. Now we'll talk about the thick and the thin filaments. Coming to the thick filaments, it has a diameter twice that of the thin filament. And the thick filament is made up of hundreds of molecules of the contractile protein, which is called as the myosin. So this is one thick filament, and you can see it is made up of the protein, which is called as the myosin, and it is a contractile protein. Now the myosin is made up of polypeptide chains, 6 polypeptide chains, 2 heavy chains and 4 light chains. So you can see here 2 heavy chains, and you can see here 4 light chains. So it is made up of the 6 polypeptide chains. Now if you see the heavy chains, they are wrapped to form a double helix, which constitutes the tail and the body of the myosin molecule. So this is the tail and the body of the myosin molecule. So you can see a double helix arrangement of the heavy chains. Now you have the other part of the myosin molecule. In addition to the tail and the body, you have here what is called as the head portion of the myosin, molecule. Now this head portion has the binding site for 2 substances, that is actin and ATP. So we have actin binding site and ATP binding site on the myosin head. So myosin head contains an actin binding site and ATP binding site. Now the ATP binding site is a catalytic site which hydrolyzes the ATP. And I say it as catalytic because the myosin head contains an enzyme called as myosin ATPase, which hydrolyzes ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate. So we have the 2 binding sites, ATP and actin, on the myosin head. And we have an enzyme which is called as the myosin ATPase, which hydrolyzes the ATP when it is bound to the myosin head. And once the myosin ATPase acts on ATP, it hydrolyzes ATP to ADP and inorganic phosphate. And this is the arrangement of the ATP binding site, actin binding site, the heavy chains and the light chains. So the light chains you can see at the terminal portion of the heavy chains, and it is forming closer to the head of the myosin molecule. And if you look at the thick filament here, the head portion is present throughout the thick filament except in the center. In the center, you don't have the head portion. The head portion is not present at the center portion of the myosin molecule or the thick filament. In the thick filament, in the center portion, you do not have the head portion of the myosin molecule. And if you see the myosin molecule head, if you can see here, half are oriented upwards and half are oriented downwards. So this is the arrangement of the myosin molecule on the thick filament. Okay, any questions so far?
Doctor,
Yes.
just to clarify, the 4 light chain is making the head portion.
It is forming the part of the
Forming.
head portion. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the heavy is making the tail
Head has got
portion.
binding sites for actin and ATP.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
So that is about the thick filament and the myosin molecule. Now coming to the thin filament, as the name suggests, it is thinner than the thick filament. So we call it as the thin filament. Now the thin filament is made up of not only the contractile proteins, it is also made up of the regulatory proteins. So we have 3 proteins which you can see here, one in blue, which is called as the actin protein, and the one in yellow, we call it as the tropomyosin. And we have another protein in the thin filament, which is called as troponin. So basically there are 3 proteins, out of which actin is a contractile protein and troponin and tropomyosin are the regulatory proteins. Okay, so we have 1 contractile protein and 2 regulatory proteins, tropomyosin and troponin in the thin filament. Now, if you see the tropomyosin molecules, they are the long filaments. You can see here the yellow ones, which are long filaments, which lie in the grooves between the 2 chains of the actin molecules. The blue ones are the actin molecules. In the groove, you can see them fitting. That protein is called as the tropomyosin. Now, if you look at the blue protein here, which is the actin protein, in the center, you can see a black region. That is the binding site for myosin head. That is the binding site for myosin head. We also call it as the cross bridge binding site, or we call it as the active site. It is called as the active site. Okay. And if you see the tropomyosin in the resting state covers these sites. Okay, it covers these active sites in the resting state, and it covers the binding site for the myosin head on the thin filament. Now coming to the next protein, which is present here, the pink one, the globular protein, which is called as the troponin. Now the troponin are globular proteins which are located at intervals along the tropomyosin. So along the tropomyosin at intervals, you can see the protein which is called as troponin. Now this troponin has got 3 subunits. Okay, it has got 3 subunits, and these subunits are called as troponin C, troponin I, and troponin T. Okay, I, T, and C. So these are the 3 subunits of troponin. Now the troponin subunit C has or contains the binding site for calcium. So it has a calcium binding site. So we call that portion of the troponin as troponin C. Now the troponin, which is attached to the tropomyosin, that part is called, the subunit of troponin is called as troponin T. Okay, it is attached to the tropomyosin or bound to tropomyosin. So we have troponin T, troponin C. Troponin C binds to calcium. It has binding site for calcium, and troponin T is where the troponin is attached to the tropomyosin. Now we have another subunit of troponin which is called as the troponin I, And this prevents the interaction of myosin head with the active sites on the actin. So we have the troponin I inhibits. So that's why it's called as I. It inhibits the interaction of myosin head to the active site on actin. So that is the subunit of the troponin I, T, and C. Any questions?
Doctor, correction, because I'm not sure if this is my hearing. This another subunit is troponin T or P?
T, T.
T. All right.
T.
Thank you.
Ma'am,
Yes.
could you explain the cross-bridge binding site again, please?
Okay. So the cross-bridge binding site is the site on the thin filament where the myosin head binds to that site on the thin filament. That is called as the cross-bridge binding site.
And what covers it?
The tropomyosin. So you can see here the yellow part. This covers all the active sites.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
And this is in the resting state. When the muscle is resting. Okay, not
Right.
when it is undergoing contraction. Okay, so that is about the thin filament. It has contractile protein and the regulatory protein. The contractile protein is the actin, and we have the regulatory proteins, troponin and tropomyosin. Okay, so we move on to now we know the arrangements of the myofibrils. We know the thick and the thin filaments, what are its components and how they are arranged in the resting state. And now we see what changes occur to cause the contraction. Now, we have known about the electrical phenomenon which is occurring in the muscle, which is the muscle action potential, which we have seen in the previous lecture, where a nerve action potential causes a muscle action potential via neuromuscular transmission. Now, how the muscle action potential causes a mechanical phenomenon, which is called as muscle contraction, that is called as excitation contraction coupling. Excitation is an electrical phenomenon. Contraction is a mechanical phenomenon. Mechanical means electrical means there is no change, there is change in the membrane potential. Contraction means there is change in the structure or the arrangement of the structure in the muscle. So that is called as the mechanical phenomenon. Now both these are occurring one after the other, and that is called as excitation contraction coupling. So we'll see the steps in excitation contraction coupling. So excitation contraction coupling, if you want to define, it is the sequence of events by which the transmission of an action potential along the sarcolemma leads to the sliding of the filaments. The filaments are going to be sliding one over another, and that is what is called as contraction. And how the muscle action potential causes this is called as excitation contraction coupling. So there are certain sequence of events which are occurring in the excitation contraction coupling. So this is just to show you about the action potential. You have seen in the previous lectures the arrangement of the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma is the cell membrane of the muscle fiber. It is the cell membrane of the muscle fiber. We have seen at the neuromuscular junction, at the motor end plate, the sarcolemma is showing a gutter here, which is called as the palisades, which has the nicotinic cholinergic receptors. And this is the area where there is development of the end plate potential. Now, adjacent to the motor end plate, you have the voltage gated sodium channels, and this leads to muscle action potential. So this is what we have seen in the previous lectures. End plate potential is developed at the motor end plate. Muscle action potential is developed at the adjacent sides of the motor end plate. Now you must also know about the sarcolemma. It invaginates into the muscle fiber, means it goes down and comes out. The membrane goes down and comes up in between the muscle fiber. It's not a straight membrane. At the neuromuscular junction, it shows palisades, and in between also there will be invaginations into the muscle fiber membrane. Now this invagination of the cell membrane or the sarcolemma, we call it as the T-tubule, or we call it as the transverse tubule. It is going inside the muscle fiber and coming out. That part of the cell membrane is called, of the muscle fiber is called as the T-tubule or the transverse tubule. Now we have certain proteins on the T tubule and we have certain proteins adjacent to the T tubule. Now adjacent to the T tubule, we have the modified endoplasmic reticulum in the muscle fiber, which is called as sarcoplasmic reticulum. So sarcoplasmic reticulum is nothing but the modified endoplasmic reticulum, which is present in the skeletal muscle. Now, why do we call it as modified is because you can see here, this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, it has a dilated portion here. This is the dilated portion of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And this dilated portion of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, we call it as the cisterns. We call it as cisterns, C-I-S-T-E-R-N-S, cisterns. Okay. Now this cisterns is the place where calcium is stored in the muscle. It is the place where calcium is stored in the muscle. So sarcoplasmic reticulum is a modified endoplasmic reticulum of the skeletal muscle. It is dilated and that portion is where there is storage of calcium, and that part of the sarcoplasmic reticulum we call it as cisternae. Okay. Now this is the T tubule, which you can see here, the invagination of the sarcolemma. Okay, invagination of the sarcolemma. Now this T tubule is very close to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So together we call it as the sarcotubular system. We call it as the sarcotubular system. We have the T tubules, we have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which are adjacent to each other. Remember, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is also present on the other side. Okay, on both the sides of the T tubule, we have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or rather the cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum are present on both the sides of the T tubules. Now this T tubule and the sarcoplasmic reticulum has got proteins on their membranes. They have proteins on their membrane. The protein which is present on the T tubule is called as the DHPR, or we call it as the dihydropyridine receptor. We call it as the dihydropyridine receptor. We have another protein on the membrane of the cisternae or the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which we call it as RYR, or called as ryanodine receptor. We call it as the ryanodine receptor. So these are basically the channels for the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the cytosol, So we call them as the calcium channels. Now you must know that the dihydropyridine receptor is a voltage sensor. Means it senses the change in the potential or the voltage. So that is what is called as the voltage sensor, and this voltage sensor is present on the T tubules. And we have the DHPR is attached to the ryanodine receptors by some proteins. Okay, these red ones you can see here, they are the proteins. We call them as the feed processes or food proteins. So these are attached to the ryanodine receptor. So basically we have proteins which are making connection between the cell membrane and the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The part of the cell membrane involved is the T tubule, and the receptor is called as the dihydropyridine receptor. And this is attached with the help of proteins to the receptor which is present on the sarcoplasmic reticulum called as the ryanodine receptor. Basically, this is a calcium channel which releases calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the cytosol. And these together are called as the sarcotubular system. Okay, so the muscle action potential is generated on the sarcolemma and then comes to the T tubule. Okay, because T tubule is a part of the sarcolemma. Okay, so action potential is generated, it propagates and comes to the T tubule here, and immediately the change in the membrane potential is sensed by the dihydropyridine receptor, and it is attached to the ryanodine receptor, and that's why it causes the release of calcium into the cytosol from the cisternae. So this is the function of the sarcotubular system. Now, how does this occur is the action potential is propagated along the sarcolemma down the tubules. Remember, T tubule is the part of the sarcolemma. It is just an invagination of the sarcolemma. So if the muscle action potential is developed on the cell membrane, that is the sarcolemma, it will propagate and it will come to the T tubule. And this change in the membrane potential is sensed by the dihydropyridine receptor, which is present on the T tubule, because they are voltage sensitive receptors, or they are voltage sensors. Okay, and when they sense the change in the membrane potential, there will be a change in the shape of the dihydropyridine receptor. And immediately this will cause, via the food processes, means the proteins which link the dihydropyridine receptor and the ryanodine receptor, and with their help it causes the ryanodine receptor to change its conformation and to release the calcium from the cisternae into the cytosol, from the cisternae into the cytosol. Okay, so that is how calcium is released from the cisternae into the cytosol. Now, if calcium is released, where do you think it will go and bind?
To the troponin.
Troponin, which component, which subunit of troponin?
Troponin C.
Troponin C. Okay, calcium will go and bind to the troponin C. Now, once the calcium goes and binds to the troponin C, we have the binding of troponin I to the actin filament weakens. Okay, so the bonding between troponin I to the actin filament weakens, and the tropomyosin molecule will also move from the active site. It will move from the active site because they are all attached to each other. Okay, troponin I is attached to actin, troponin T is attached to tropomyosin. So there will be conformation change in the troponin molecule, and this will uncover or expose the active site because of the lateral movement of tropomyosin. So this will expose the active site. Active site is the cross bridge binding site on the actin filament. And this will lead to what is called as the cross bridge cycling. So myosin will bind to actin to form cross bridges, and the cross bridge cycling will begin. So this is how the muscle action potential propagates to the T tubule. There will be a voltage sensing thing with the dihydropyridine receptor, which sends the signal to the ryanodine receptor to change its conformation, and calcium will be released into the cytosol. Calcium will bind to troponin C subunit, and this will cause the or weaken the troponin I component to the actin filament, and also will move the tropomyosin molecule and will uncover the active site. And if the active site is uncovered, the myosin head will go and bind to the uncovered active site, causing muscle contraction. And how does that occur is what we are going to see in steps which are called as cross bridge cycling. Now you can see here, these are the steps involved. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4 steps in the cross bridge cycling. So you have these dots you can see are the active sites which are now exposed, and we have the energized myosin head. Now, what do you mean by energized myosin head? Okay, myosin head has a binding site for ATP. Now, as soon as ATP binds to the myosin head, the myosin ATPase enzyme will hydrolyze the ATP and energize the myosin head. Means it will break down ATP to ADP and inorganic phosphate. That is called as energized myosin head. So if just ATP is attached to myosin, we don't call it as energized myosin head. Myosin ATPase has to split ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate, and that which is attached to the myosin head, ADP and inorganic phosphate, that head of the myosin, we call it as the energized myosin head. That is a must. Without that, the myosin head cannot bind to the active site, even though if the active site is exposed. Okay, we need to energize the myosin head. Now, once the energized myosin head finds the active site, it will move towards the active site perpendicularly at 90 degrees and goes and attaches to the active site to form a complex, which we call it as the actin myosin ADP inorganic phosphate complex. So this complex is formed. So that is the first step. That is the first step in cross bridge cycling. Energized myosin head going and binding to the exposed active site along with ADP and inorganic phosphate to form a complex. Now, once the complex is formed or it is attached to the active site, the next events start or the next step starts. And during this time, two events occur. One is the release of ADP and PI from the complex. ADP and inorganic phosphate, which are attached to the complex, now are released. The second change which is occurring here, you can see here the myosin head is attached perpendicularly, and here there is a slight flexion, there is bending. Now it moves 45 degree. Instead of 90 degree, it becomes 45 degree. That is called as the flexion of the myosin head. And this is when the myosin head moves, it flexes. Okay. And when this flexion occurs, there is a generation of force or tension in the muscle. There is a generation of force or tension in the muscle, and this step is called as power stroke. We call it as power stroke. So that is the second step. So first step is the actin myosin ADP inorganic phosphate complex. The second step is the power stroke and the release of ADP and inorganic phosphate from the complex. Now the myosin head does not have ATP. So a new ATP molecule binds to the myosin head. A new ATP molecule binds to the myosin head. When a new ATP molecule binds to the myosin head, now myosin ATP does not want to bind to the active site. So it detaches. It detaches. So this is what we see here. There is detachment of the myosin head from the exposed active site. So we have, because a new ATP molecule binds to the myosin head, there is detachment. This is the third step. So first is attachment and forming complex. The second one is power stroke. And the third one is the detachment of the myosin head from the exposed active site. And once ATP is bound to the myosin head, myosin ATPase enzyme will split ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate and energize the myosin head. And that is the fourth step, that is reactivation of the myosin head. And the cycle will continue as long as there is exposure of the active site and as long as there is availability of ATP. Now, you must know ATP is required for the attachment. ATP is required for the detachment of the myosin head from the active site. For attachment, energized myosin head requires ATP. For detachment also, it requires ATP. So these are the two places in the cross-bridge cycling where ATP is required. And these are the four steps in the cross-bridge cycling. So the first step is the formation of the complex. Remember, only the energized myosin head will go and bind to the active site, forming a complex actin myosin ADP inorganic phosphate complex, which is called as the cross-bridge formation. The second step is the release of ADP and inorganic phosphate and the bending of the myosin head, which generates a force or tension, and that is called as the power stroke. The third step is the detachment, that is because of the ATP molecule binding to the myosin head, and that will detach the myosin head from the active site. And the fourth step is the reactivation of the cross bridge, and the cycle will repeat again and again as long as there is exposure of active site and the presence of ATP. The cycle will continue. So these are the four steps in cross bridge cycling. Now, when there is power stroke, what happens is the filaments slide over one another. The filaments come closer to the M line. The filaments come closer to the M line, and that is called as the sliding of the filaments. Okay, that this occurs during the power stroke. When it is bending, it just pushes the filaments towards the center. So that is what is generating the force and causing the sliding of the filaments. This we call it as the contraction. We call it as the contraction. Contraction is nothing but shortening of the muscle. Sarcomeres shorten because of the power stroke and the sliding of the filaments. So this is what is contraction, and this is the steps which are occurring in the cross bridge cycling. Any questions?
Doctor.
Yes.
You say that ATP causes attachment and also detachment of the both filaments, right?
Yes.
So according to the detachment there, right? So since it is energized already, why
Yes.
not the ADP will continuously energize the filaments instead of detaching it?
No, because as soon as it gets attached to the active site, ADP and inorganic phosphate are released.
Wait, so oh yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay, so a new ATP molecule has to be attached to energize it again.
Ah
That is
yeah.
how
Okay.
the protein works. Once it binds, ADP inorganic phosphate goes away. It doesn't want to stay there. It is released and new
Okay,
ATP
understood.
molecule binds.
Okay,
And
okay.
then you
Thank
have to
you.
again form the ADP and inorganic phosphate. For that, it has to detach. Only then it will form the ADP and inorganic phosphate.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay, so that is about the cross-bridge cycling. Now coming to the contraction, which is the interaction between the contractile proteins that generates the force and begins with myosin binding sites of the actin are exposed. How the myosin binding sites on actin are exposed? What causes its exposure?
Binding of
Burn
calcium
of
to
calcium.
Binding of the calcium.
Yes, release of calcium from the cisternae into the cytosol and binding it to troponin C. This will expose the active site. And once the active site is exposed, then the cross-bridge cycling, you can see the cross-bridge formation, power stroke. So that will lead to contraction. So it depends on the presence of calcium and ATP. ATP is required for attachment and detachment, and calcium is required to expose the active sites on the thin filaments. Okay. ATP is usually required for the thick filaments, cross-bridge cycling steps, and calcium is required for the thin filaments to expose the active site. So bring about changes in the thin and the thick filaments, we require calcium and ATP for the muscle to undergo contraction. And for contraction means the thin and the thick filaments, there must be interaction. And during that time, there will be shortening of the muscle. This is called as muscle contraction. And we require various steps, various proteins, and various other sources like calcium and ATP in the muscle contraction. This occurs in skeletal muscles. Okay, for skeletal muscle, calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So we must have enough amount of calcium in the sarcoplasmic reticulum for it to be released to undergo skeletal muscle contraction in addition to ATP. So once the calcium is released, we don't want calcium to continuously stay there. We don't want the muscle to continuously contract. Calcium will be taken back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Here SR stands for sarcoplasmic reticulum. The calcium which is released, which is not used for muscle contraction, goes back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. How does it go back? Is through the channel, which is called as calcium ATPase. It is a primary active transport. Okay, calcium moves from the cytosol into the sarcoplasmic reticulum via calcium ATPase. Okay, so it is an active transport system which continuously transports calcium from the sarcoplasm into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And if no further action potentials arrive, the released calcium is taken back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum by primary active transport. And in the absence of calcium, calcium is no longer bound to troponin C. So the active sites are now not exposed. So myosin head cannot bind to the active site. So because it is covered by the tropomyosin. So the result is muscle relaxation. So when the calcium ions are pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the calcium concentration in the cytosol of the skeletal muscle fiber, we call it as sarcoplasm, that will be decreased. And if that is so, then calcium ions will not bind to troponin and causes the detachment of myosin from actin, and this will lead to the skeletal muscle relaxation. Remember, ATP is required for muscle relaxation because we want the calcium to go back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. For that, it requires calcium ATPase, primary active transport requires ATP. So ATP is required for muscle contraction as well as muscle relaxation. In muscle contraction, we require ATP in two steps, attachment and detachment of the myosin head to the active site. And in the relaxation, for calcium to pump back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, we also require ATP. ATP is involved in both relaxation and contraction in the skeletal muscle. Okay, am I clear?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So this is the summary of the excitation, coupling, contraction, and relaxation. So we have the action potential arrival at the somatic motor neuron. And the somatic motor neuron terminal has the vesicles filled with the neurotransmitter, which is acetylcholine. And this is the motor end plate, which is the palisades, has the receptors, which are called as, what do we name that receptors? Those receptors?
Nicotinic
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 cholinergic.
cholinergic receptors. Yes, we have the nicotinic cholinergic receptors. And this will allow the entry of sodium ions and lead to end plate potential. And once the membrane potential changes at the motor end plate, adjacent to the motor end plate, there is generation of the muscle action potential. This muscle action potential, which is generated, it propagates and comes to the T-tubule. Okay. And this T-tubule is in close proximity with the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the dilated portion is called as cisternae, and this will allow the release of the calcium into the cytosol. Okay, this is the release. Now, how does the release occur? Is because of the dihydropyridine receptor and the ryanodine receptor. These are the calcium channels. Okay, DHPR or dihydropyridine receptor is a voltage gated calcium channel. It takes the help of ryanodine receptor and releases the calcium. Remember, calcium is released into the cytosol, not outside the muscle fiber. Okay, it is released into the cytosol. And once calcium is released, it binds to troponin C and involves the power stroke, and that will cause the sliding of the filaments, leading to muscle contraction. Extra calcium goes back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum by calcium ATPase, causing muscle relaxation, and there is no binding of the myosin head to the actin, and this will lead to skeletal muscle relaxation. So now you know how a nerve action potential caused a muscle action potential, and how it caused the release of calcium into the cytosol and caused the muscle contraction, that is sliding of the filaments one over another. And these are the steps involved in a muscle fiber contraction and relaxation. Any questions?
I do, doctor. So basically, if there's an excess of calcium ion, or for example, if there's no more contraction, the calcium goes back to the SR by
Yes.
ATP or ATPase?
ATPase.
ATPase.
Yes,
Okay.
ATPase will split ATP and energy will be utilized for the pumping back.
All right.
Okay, ATPase is the enzyme which splits ATP. Okay, so what are the changes which are occurring in the sarcomere? That is the sliding filament theory or the sliding filament mechanism. So during contraction, you can see here, this is the relaxed state and this is the shortened or the contracted state. If you see here, the Z lines have come closer to each other. That means the sarcomere has shortened. The Z discs are pulled towards the M line. This occurs during the power stroke. We can see the sarcomeres are going to be shortened. The other changes in the sarcomere which can occur are the I bands are shortened. The H zones also shorten or disappear depending upon the magnitude of the contraction. H zones shorten, disappear. The only part of the sarcomere which does not change in length is the A band. The A band does not change. A band is made up of the thick filament, and it is filaments, the proteins are not going to change in size. Okay, it is only the components of the sarcomere which are going to change in size. That is, the A band does not change, I band shortens, H zone shortens, the Z lines come closer to each other. The size of the thick filament, the size of the thin filament does not change. Okay, So the thin filaments slide over the thick filaments, sarcomere shorten, Z discs are pulled towards the M line. So you can see here, they are pulled towards the M line. The I bands are going to be shortened, the H zone is going to be disappeared, and the only change which does not occur is in the A band. A band is mostly made up of the thick filament, that is the myosin molecule. The proteins do not change in length. It is only the part of the sarcomere which changes in length. So these are the changes which we see during the skeletal muscle contraction. Now we come on to the coming to the last significance of the ATP in the skeletal muscle contraction, that is the attachment and the detachment, is useful in a situation which is called as rigor mortis. Rigor means stiffness. Okay, the muscle is stiff, it is in a state of contraction, then we call it as stiffness. Mortis means of death. The stiffness seen after death is called as rigor mortis. Now, what causes the rigor mortis is it is referring to the shortening and rigidity of all the body muscles, which occurs some hours after death. So, some hours after death, what happens is the muscle is in a state of contraction. There is shortening and rigidity of all the skeletal muscles, which occurs after death. This is called as rigor mortis. Now, why does this occur is because there is the fixation of the cross bridge to the myosin head to actin filaments. Okay, fixation means it is attached. It is not detached, it is attached. Remember the cross bridge cycling, you need attachment, power stroke, and then there is detachment. Now this detachment does not occur following death, and that leads to the attachment of the energized myosin head to the active site, exposed active site. It remains there, and that will lead to a state of muscle contraction. This is what is seen in rigor mortis. The rigidity is because of the fixation or attachment of the cross bridge of the myosin head, means the energized myosin head has bound to the actin filament and it has not detached. What do we require for detachment?
ATPA.
ATP, okay, ATP is required. Now we don't have, after that there is loss of all the ATPs, which is normally required for detachment. So whatever is attached now cannot detach because there is lack of ATP. And this leads to the rigidity or stiffness which is following after death, and that is called as rigor mortis. So that is the significance of ATP in attachment and detachment during the cross bridge cycle, which we see after death in a situation which is called as rigor mortis. Now the rigidity will disappear after some hours. Okay, after some hours after death, the rigidity will disappear. See, you die, and after few hours you see rigor mortis, and after the development of rigor mortis, after few hours there is disappearance of the rigor mortis or rigidity. Now the disappearance of the rigor mortis which we see is because of the destruction of the muscle proteins. Muscle proteins are destructed by the enzymes which are released by the lysozymes. After death, lysozymes will release certain enzymes which will destruct all the proteins, including the muscle proteins. We know the attachment is because of the muscle proteins, right? Now, if they are destructed, there is no attachment. So the rigidity will go off. So it disappears after some hours. Now, the importance or significance of rigor mortis is you must note the appearance and disappearance of rigor mortis is used by forensic experts in fixing the time of death. So you get a dead body and you don't know what is the time of death. So you see whether there is rigor mortis or you don't see rigor mortis. Okay, based on the presence or absence or appearance and disappearance of rigor mortis, you can tell the time of the death. You can fix the time of death. So that is the significance of rigor mortis. Now I leave it to you to find out when there is after death, after how many hours there is appearance of rigor mortis, and after how many hours there is disappearance of the rigor mortis. Okay, I hope you can find out that. Yes, can you find out that? Anybody?
Ma'am, the rigor mortis onset is 12 hours and disappearance 40 to 60 hours.
Okay, 40 to 60 hours and 12 hours. Okay, fine. So if anybody has anything, you can find out from the textbooks exactly the range should be known. Okay, is it after 4 to 12 hours or 6 to 12 hours, whatever, you can find out the range and appearance and the disappearance. So if you see a dead body and you have a rigor mortis seen in the dead body, then you know, okay, so there is no disappearance of rigor mortis, so this is the time of death. Okay, so this is how the forensic experts can fix the time of death based on rigor mortis. And why rigor mortis occurs is because of the lack of ATP, which is involved in, which we require for the detachment in the cross-bridge cycling. Am I clear?
Yes, doctor.
Any questions?
Doctor.
Yes.
Actually, right, according to the cross bridge cycling there, right,
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused about the second step there, which is
Which one?
the cross bridge move, right? So actually, when the cross bridge move, it will actually release the adenosine phosphate and also the inorganic phosphate out, right?
Yes.
Okay, so since there's no more inorganic phosphate, why do ADP binding will causes detachment then? I thought because ADP will cause detachment because there is presence of the inorganic phosphate.
See, ATP is bound to myosin head, ADP and PI bound to myosin head. Okay, both will want to bind to actin. Okay. Okay, a situation where you have a myosin head with ADP and PI and another myosin head with only ATP. Okay, so the one with ADP and PI has got a stronger connection for binding to active site. Now, once ATP is only bound without ADP and inorganic phosphate, the active site, even though it is attached, it will weaken. That's how the molecule works.
I see.
Yes. So if ATP is bound to myosin head without it being hydrolyzed, immediately wherever it is there to the active site, it will detach. It weakens the interaction between the myosin head and the actin.
Oh, so
Yes.
in the third step, right, this ADP bind to the myosin is actually when the myosin no wait, there's
After the power stroke, yes.
so means there is release of the inorganic phosphate and ADP. There's no
Two
ADP
things
and
occur very simultaneously. ADP PI is released and there is bending, power stroke. So two things occur. As soon as power stroke occurs, a new ATP molecule will bind and immediately detach.
I get it.
Yes, as soon as ATP is bound, it is detached. Myosin ATPase will break ATP to ADP and inorganic phosphate, energize the myosin head and go and bind. And the cycle will repeat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any questions?
Oh yeah, one more question regarding to the receptor protein there.
No.
So the DHP receptor, so basically when the action potential reaches the DHPR receptor,
yes,
right?
yes.
So the DHPR receptor will change the conformation.
Yes,
so,
because it is a voltage sensor.
Yeah. So when this conformation actually change, right, the protein inside the protein between the receptor will change and then causes RYR.
That also changes in conformation, which will also change the conformation of the ryanodine receptor. So conformation of all the three proteins are going to be changed. They are going to change in their alignment or structure. They're going to change. As soon as the voltage change is sensed by DHPR, it is going to change the conformation of the food processes of food proteins, which are attached to the ryanodine receptor. The ryanodine receptor is going to release the calcium into the cytosol.
So what is the use of the food receptor again? To connect them?
Yes, it is not directly connected. It takes the help of certain proteins. Okay. Shall I stop?
Thank you, doctor.
Okay.